Right, carry on.
So, hello everyone. As you know, I'm Caroline Murray, and I'm the mental health trustee for TUF. So, in previous years, when we've had our annual general meeting, we have had outside people come in to talk to us, and but this year is so different. And we thought when we met as a board last week that it would be a good idea for us to look at something celebratory. So I had this idea that we think about, some of the events that have happened this year, and in the course of my job, I have been obviously looking at the impact of COVID-19, but also the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, and also working in the NHS, just understanding what where we are at. I have recently become a co-chair of the BAME, for want of a better word, staff network, and we had an interesting discussion a couple of meetings ago about the Black nurses who saved the NHS, because we were in October in Black History Month, and Black History Month this year was like no other. We had an opportunity to really think about all the events that happened this year. And it felt very celebratory. And it also felt this year, even with Black Lives Matter, that there's a lot of history, a lot of that we don't know, or that we don't talk about or focus on. So I had this discussion at work, and I was very, very pleased to see that we talked about the documentary that was done on BBC Channel 4 and shown during this year. And also the fact that I recognized that I was very pleased to have Allyson Williams that I served with on the TUF board. And I was very proud of that. So when I was talking to colleagues about that, I was like, yeah, that documentary, was good. And I know Allyson as well. And also it was interesting because I also knew a couple other people on there. And I think it's an opportunity for us in having this discussion about Black nurses who saved the NHS, because majority of us on this call are Black nurses, and number of us have saved the NHS and continue to save the NHS where we are at now in our current, so we have retired and we have current serving members of the NHS. So we thought that it would be a good opportunity to talk about the Black nurses who saved the NHS. And I know people have their cameras off, but it'd be really good to see if people wanted to turn their cameras on, so I could kind of see the responses. So some of the things that we're talking about might resonate with you, or you might be nodding your head, and it would be good to understand or to see some of that participation so we could be a bit more interactive. So what I wanted to sort of say is just to introduce Allyson as well, and also just to look at, I guess, some of the reflections that I had during the documentary that was shown. And maybe if people could sort of say whether they'd seen that documentary. It's been on BBC too, but also it's on YouTube as well, if it's not showing on the current cycle. So yes, thanks for turning on your camera, Susan. It's really good, because I want us to be an interactive session where we can, see the nods and things like that. And obviously just to sort of say, Allyson, thanks so much for sort of being featured as our feature for Black nurses who saved the NHS.
My pleasure, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so what we thought we would do, Allyson and I, we thought, so I would just give a bit of a reflection on that. Do we know, has everybody seen that documentary? Yeah? Black nurses who saved the NHS. So yeah. A few people, yes? Vita, you've seen it?
No, I haven't.
Okay, Shelley, you have. Rosie, I don't know. Roseman, I don't know if you've seen it, and Tash, but it's as I said, you can Google it on YouTube, but yes, it's also being shown on so this documentary as well reminded me as well of experiences that my mother told me about. So my mom was came to England in 1965 and trained as a nurse and midwife, and returned home in 1972 because I was there, obviously. This documentary just really stood out as an opportunity for us to celebrate the work that we did as Black nurses and midwives in this country. So I'll just go through a couple of the things. So I wrote my thoughts down based on from the start of the film to the end. So there's lots of different themes within this, and we can just talk about that. And if we'll probably leave some time, you know, if people put their hands up and just sort of want to come in, but also in terms of Allyson, you know, this is our mini interview before the real thing, probably. So what struck me from the beginning of this documentary was the fact that people did not want Black nurses or midwives in England at the time. And there was this whole idea that, you know, this man, Aneurin Bevan, came down to the Caribbean, and sort of between 1945 and 51, they thought that they would need some help, but they didn't tell the people. They didn't tell the people that they were coming to bring people from the Caribbean and Africa to work in the NHS, because the system that they created costed more than they anticipated. It costed somewhat about 30% more than that. And they realized that they needed about 40,000 plus nurses. And obviously they thought, okay, let's go down because we've got the Caribbean in our empire, and went and recruited nurses from there. And I know there's been I guess several experiences. When speaking with Allyson, you know, some people saved up and they came on, which was as my mom. But Allyson, you had a different experience.
Yes.
When you came, because that wasn't in the documentary. When you came, your process was so slightly different and involved the ministry back home. So if you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, my mother as well my mother was a nurse, and so I was fascinated by the whole profession. I grew up looking at her practice, going through the hospital. I knew Port of Spain General Hospital very well. And when I decided, and I had always said that I would like to be like my mother. So when I decided it was time to stop the partying, when she reminded me that life wasn't a big party, I said, okay, I'm going to go. And so all her friends in the hospital said, you had to go to London. And it was the best place to train, and you could train as a nurse and a midwife as you want and come back and give back to Trinidad. But when I went to find out about the nursing, I was told by my mother's friends that they were recruiting through the Ministry of Health. So I actually went to the Ministry of Health and made an appointment to talk to the relevant officers. And when I went there, they told me that they had been sitting and talking for some time with people, nursing officers from England, all over England. And they had this ongoing campaign that they wanted to recruit the best of the best. And so they were doing it. I wasn't sure if there was any of them doing it in any other island, but I know it was in Trinidad. They wanted the nurses and nurses to come and train through the Ministry of Health. So I was interviewed by a panel at the Ministry of Health and sent away and then told a few days later that I had passed the selection process. And then I went back to actually sit down and understand what this was about. And they had tons and tons of information about hospitals all over England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland for me to choose from. And I sat there for hours wading through all this paperwork and looking at you know, all the benefits of the different hospitals. And one of the issues that we talked about, Caroline, was this SCN and SRN division. And that was never an issue. I don't know if it was because I was interviewed at the Ministry of Health, if it was because of where I went to school, which was Bishops, what the criteria in the back of their heads, you know, were. But they never discussed doing an SCN course with me. I just assumed there was only the one, training as a nurse, and that was it. And eventually I decided I would go to London. And with the officer in the Ministry of Health telling me, encouraging me that London was probably the best place, and especially the Whittington Hospital, because about 80% of the nurses who went there from Trinidad to train were Black. You know, not only Trinidad, from all over the world, but 80% of them were Black. So I chose London, and that's how I ended up at 21 in 1969 at the Whittington Hospital training. So I didn't, I didn't have to do anything myself. I was given a date, and I was told that was when I had to get. I was told I had to get to London on my own, and that was about it. And I even got into a lot of trouble because I decided I wanted to see New York on the way to London. And my father took me because my godmothers lived there from Trinidad. They were from Trinidad, but they moved to New York. And I spent 2 weeks in New York, and then flew from New York to London. And I misplaced the paperwork that I had to find out about, to get to the Whittington Hospital. So I was stranded at Heathrow until this, and the days are so different to now. This young man came up to me and said, I've been here a while and you seem to have been here longer. What's your problem? Why are you sitting around here? And I told him that I was waiting for people to come from the Whittington to get me. And cut a long story short, he took me to the Whittington. And I had the officers backward and forward because obviously I had to take the coach from Heathrow to Victoria. And there were about half a dozen people up and down between the Whittington and Victoria looking for me, thinking I was lost. Because of course, on the way from Heathrow to the Whittington, we stopped for dinner. And then as it got later, we went to a pub for a drink. And, it was funny at the time, but I didn't know I was doing anything wrong. I just thought I had to get to the Whittington, and that was it. But that was my journey to the Whittington at the beginning. Yes.
So I think you made me laugh because obviously I didn't know this. We didn't talk about this. So that is really funny. And you touched on a number of things there that resonated. So one of the things that you talked about the SCN versus the SRN thing. That came up in the documentary. You talked about partying in Trinidad, but also partying here. And also the Whittington Hospital. So that makes me, in terms of this reflection and talking about this, my mother, when I was choosing nursing schools, and this was in the, in the early 90s, I came in 91. She was adamant that I must not go to nursing school in London because she said I'll be partying too much. She was like,
set a bad example, I suppose.
And I know now that it was because my mother was like the party queen at the Whittington at one point in time, because apparently she used to have lots of parties. She used to cook a pilau, and all the people who brought up rum and things like that and didn't want to drink it, that used to find its way into the party. And my mom used to party quite a lot, apparently. So years later, she denied me of that, and I ended up training in Buckinghamshire, and it's quite interesting. I did have some parties in Buckinghamshire, and I taught people to wine. Dollar wine was a big thing one year. So there was two girls from Tobago in my class, one from South Africa, and me, about 4 or 5 of us in my set. So we like to party, and I think we brought that, and that was something that came out in the documentary, that people were partying and having a good time, and they made lots of different friendships in coming here. So I think Whittington, I don't know if anybody else trained at the Whittington, but I think my mom did her midwifery there or whatever. But I need to find out all these details actually. But it's getting that we brought something with us. We brought ability, and that helped with our resilience, don't you think?
Yes. Oh, yes. I think it was very, very important because when I got there, my set had 32 girls, and one of them was English, and two Irish, and the rest were black girls from the
Okay.
Caribbean,
Okay.
Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Iran. It was quite a mix. And of course, I didn't know anybody in London. People thought I was really particularly brave. Um, you know, Better so than when I was in New York, the hundreds of people I met in 2 weeks that I knew from home, my parents' friends, so everybody thought I was particularly brave to go to London. But that was how we socialized and that was how we met. Because also when we started at the Whittington, they used to take, we got the sum total of £18 a month salary. But they used to feed us. And so we fed ourselves. We went to every meal in the dining room. And that is how everybody socialized. And that is how you found out who had relatives and who didn't. And so we went to a lot of, we would invite each other to our families' homes. And so that's how the socializing and the partying built up, because that was the way you stayed close. And for many of us on the wards, it was so awful that you really needed to do that, because I was the victim of a lot of racism. I was, it was relentless in the first 6 months or so of my time. And it was scary because, of course, we're Trinidadians. We're so cosmopolitan. We are so used to, I had white girls in my class at Bishop's and we were friends and we go to each other's homes and, and we never, in that time, I never really thought of I was black and anybody was white. Or, you used to hear people say the light-skinned ones, the light-skinned girls worked in the bank, but to me, they were still black, so, and I didn't want to work in a bank anyway, so it didn't really matter. So, so coming to London and putting up with the racism and patients slapping you and slapping your hand away and saying they didn't want the black to rub off, and what were the trees like and the monkeys and where did we go to the toilet and all of that. I just thought I didn't know these people sounded so savage to me because of course all my schooling was based on the English system and I had an O and A level, so I couldn't understand where these people were coming from, and you look up to you thought everybody was very, very special and very in need of our help. This was the mother country. And we really felt like we were saving the NHS, because that was my idea when I got all this information and was selected and I was chosen to come. To me, I was chosen to come and help rebuild the motherland. And so I felt very special. And then you go after your PTS 3 months training, the theory, and you go on the wards and you listen to these people asking you, where is Trinidad and where did you come from and what part of America or Canada or Africa or Asia did you come from? I thought, well, don't they learn their own stuff? They were so uneducated.
Yes, I think so. And I know Susan has put in the chat. I can't see the chat fully, but I saw something come up saying that the stories are so familiar.
Yeah.
And I think that is that familiarity, and hearing you talk, it just blows my mind, because I could think about, one of the things that I talk about and talked about recently in my job has been the fact that I feel that having grown up in Trinidad and being a Trinbagonian has shaped or given me the resilience to survive my experiences in the NHS. So from the monkey noises that I had up in a little town up in Buckinghamshire to, being overlooked for things as people had been overlooked in the documentary, it gave me that resilience, because as you say, remember, we are coming from the Caribbean, where British people thought we were this proper third world living in huts, that kind of thing. And we had gained independence in 1962. We had a good educational system. We had Dr. Williams and everybody. We were quite progressive. You know, we went to good schools, the prestigious schools or whatever you want to call them. We were educated, and you realize that you come into a system where people are not as educated or smart as you. Just face it. A pure kind of ignorance is what you would also find. So I think that is quite interesting, because your experience in the 60s, my experience, and my mom's in the 60s, my experience in the 90s, and I know several people will have that similar thing. Because one of the things that we talked about back at recently with our group, because we started off with a staff group of about 5 people, just talking about the impact of COVID, and now we have a group of about 40 people, and we have a group of mainly Black but white people as well, talking about the need to have race equality in the NHS in England, because I think our history has been forgotten, the fact that we were here at the start of it and that we were doing that work. And I suppose it was that thing about, you mentioned about the SRN and the SEN. So many people have heard about, got caught in this system of an SEN, which really made you like a healthcare assistant, just kind of kept you at that level, and didn't allow you to progress in your career. And we heard in the documentary that people were talking about, you know, they were just put onto the SEN course because you were seen as inferior, you were seen as not as clever. And that reflected their own ignorance in terms of the people who were in charge back then. And one of the things that was really good in the documentary was when earlier on she said, you know, the nurses, they were bedpan queens, and you know, you did that and then you were ready to move on, and then the English nurses were getting the advantage. And she went and she didn't wait. She went and she spoke to the matron, and by the end of the shift or whatever, things had turned around. So it was that sort of contrast. So that happened back then. Some of it still happens now, and obviously I have spoken to colleagues currently working and saying, you know, yeah, the career progression, the opportunity to do things, to be competency, to gain the experience, or opportunities to run a ward or to do some additional training as well. That isn't often afforded people. It just kind of goes back to I guess white British people who are in the NHS. One of the things that came up as well in the documentary was, you know, people came from all over. We answered the mother country was there. There was a idea, and I really like that, from I think Beverly Chapman in the documentary, where she saw herself as an ambassador for Jamaica, and she wore her uniform with pride, and she brought her uniform out and she showed that. And I suppose everybody with a nurse in the family have the cape and the big long raincoat and the bicycle. Mommy has a picture with her on a bicycle with this big long thing, like called the midwife kind of fashions, you know, that sort of thing was, and the pride that people took. And I was reflecting with you, Allyson, that when I came, so I did mental health nursing. I didn't have a uniform. So for the first year of my thing, it was in just it was a green tabard, a sort of avocado lime green tabard. So I just had a tabard. I never had a uniform in my nurse training because I was part of the Project 2000. So yeah. it was new-ish, you know. Yes. But you know, that pride that people took in yes, wearing their uniform. Yes. And my only little bit of pride is that I still have a nursing school badge from the Buckinghamshire School of Nursing and Midwifery. But you know, you guys who went before will have your badge, your buckle, you know, your
you had hat. To, and you had to, and you had different colored belts for your level of you know, experience. And you had to, when you qualified, you had to work for 6 months at the same, your training school, so that you could get the hospital buckle, and that was your pride and joy, that you were able to sustain, being in charge and being responsible for a ward and working at a more senior level. But I mean, I have never been able to prove it, but I think that there was the discrepancy in the SN. I mean, I asked a lot of people who I knew did SEN, and there was a difference in the basic qualifications of the students who came. And I think that was probably the automatic way that they selected people, that the more GCSEs or A levels you had, is the more chance you would stay as an SRN, and the less you had is the more chance you would get streamed into doing the SEN. I mean, because I did meet quite a few Trinidadians who did the SEN, and when I did ask about their basic qualifications, I mean, not boasting or doing anything like that, but it really was that they didn't have many O levels to their name, and that is probably why they were automatically put into this category.
Yeah, and I suppose it has changed so much. So when I came, I did a diploma in nursing and then went on to do my degree in nursing. But I suppose it is that idea that wherever you start in this profession, there should always be an opportunity to be able to progress and move on.
Yes.
You shouldn't, and even if you're on SEN, there should be some sort of pathway to then go on to become a SRN, or so it's, and I suppose they are doing it now. So a lot of people who've come up by healthcare assistants, or there's got the associate nurse, and people can study and because
they've changed now.
Yeah, and I suppose we could look back and see that there's been that bit of progress, but then we're back to that stage where we are today, where career progression is still a big issue. And we recently had in London, the London Workforce Race Strategy, which was published in October. And, some of the things there, hopefully, because I think this year has given us a lot of momentum in terms of thinking about equality in the NHS, because there is recognition from the work that Klein has done about the snowy white peaks of the NHS. And I know, Roger, we've talked about that. And there's that whole concept now of allyship and sort of, because we know the majority of the senior people are NHS, and they need to be the ones to sort of look at that in the NHS and support. So we're doing quite a bit of work around that now.
I mean, in my time, the career progression was really quite difficult. And, it depended on whether you wanted to progress or not. I mean, a lot of the midwives, my contemporaries, they got married and had children and went on night duty, and they were quite content with that, and they stayed doing nights for 10 and 20 years. But I decided that I needed to progress and I needed to move on. And so it was very difficult. My first management job, I remember, I was up against 3 other Caucasian women and myself. And when I got the job, everybody in the hospital was so shocked. One of the doctors came up to me, right up into my face, and he said, "Wow, you managed that? I never noticed your blue eyes." Yes. He never noticed. And they used to call me, "Oh, you're the blue-eyed girl." And of course, you had the same thing that you kept hearing all along the way, that you had to work twice as hard to achieve half as much as your white counterparts. And it is absolutely true.
Yeah, I think that is something that we've been recognizing, particularly in this year, where we've looked at, the fact that we are known for being hardworking. And I shared a reflection where I remember when I got the job, I went for a job, and this manager, my line manager at the time, and she was interiming, and she said to me, yes, it's been recognized as you got that job. It was a promotion, one up. And where she said to me, yes, because it's been recognized that you're so hardworking. And it just made me feel like, wow, because it was nothing to do with the fact that I have all my degrees, I studied, I was competent, I could do this, I could do that. Nothing. Or that I had, achieved, I had run successful projects and done so much. It was because, oh yes, it's been recognized that you're hardworking, and also because a secret. You're saying why? I don't know if that was to do with why I about the hardworking comment, but I suppose I had also gone for another job, which was a higher band, and I didn't get that one at the time. And the person who got it was white, who had less experience or the competencies and things. And I suspect that at the time I got that job because I was hardworking and I'd be able to support the person who had the head of job. So there's a whole thing that you can unpick, and my experience isn't dissimilar from a lot of other people, where you don't get tapped up for the jobs. If there's a vacancy, people don't necessarily think about you as being able. You can have how many degrees or be competent or be but you're not often seen. And that is something that we need to change. And probably with mentoring and other things like that in the NHS system we're talking about here, that we need to think about. One of the things you touched on, Allyson, was about family, and that was something that came up in the documentary, very much to the effect that there was an example which totally broke my heart, of that woman who took her child to the childminder, and finished work early and went to collect her child, and found her child sitting in the pushchair in the hallway as she had left that child in the morning. And it totally well, what can you say? How could someone treat your child like that? And there was examples in the film where someone sent their daughter home to grandparents to look after. I was a product of that. My mother sent me home because I had a nice big extended family, and I would have been the baby and spoiled. So I had the opportunity to do that. And you also talk, Allyson, and in the documentary, some people went on to night shifts so that they can look off, be there in the daytime to get the kids off, husband go off. And it was a way of being flexible. In the film, in the documentary as well, there's also talk of people needing that flexibility, and it often not being afforded to them to be able to look after their families. And I suppose that's a similar thing. And Trent Road, and also people couldn't just go back home. You couldn't just pick up and go back to the Caribbean. Somebody in the film mentioned that I think they were getting like £10 or whatever, and the flights were like £500. And in the film, her mother said, well, you better tough it out there, because we haven't got the money to send for you. You need to do that. And I suppose that is quite interesting. When you are here, if you don't have the right support systems and stuff like that, it can be really lonely, very isolating, and all of that. I remember one of the things that I thought about when I was a student nurse was that I always tried to have £500 in my account extra. So just in case I need to go home, it's like the going home money, in case, because when you're family, you don't know what's going to happen. You always have that additional worry. So I think as Black nurses in the NHS, we always have that little extra thing to worry about, whether it's family going back home, even now in the current times, about our children, our young Black boys. you know, there's so many issues that we have to think about when we go in and put ourselves forward in this in the working in the NHS. I suppose I'm aware that it's coming up on 4 o'clock, and I just wanted to probably Allyson, I don't know if there's anything else, but just to give a bit of a more of a summary of some of the things that came up in the film that I just thought we should touch on. I think, you know, the idea of resilience is something that is really important, and we got that because of, you know, our friendships, about our families, you know, the people that we had around us, and that caused us to somehow still be able to strive in the NHS. Because at the end of the day, I think most of us have been successful. Most of us have overcome or found ways to navigate the system in which we are in. We have navigated, ducked and dived, you know, looked for the support. And I suppose what this year has shown us is that we really have an opportunity to do some more of that now. Someone mentions faith, family, friendships. That is it. Those sorts of things are our beliefs. I mean, I know for a fact that there were times when I know my mom used to go to church every day, and I know some of the things I went through was just because there was just prayers going on for me to back home, you know, just to be able to navigate this system. I think the fact that I think the NHS got a really good deal. All the nurses in the documentary talked about giving a bit of themselves. You know, you had Jackie Dunkley Bent, who did the work with Deliver the Royal Babies. The nurses there they nurse. I think Bev, she nursed with a little bit more of herself. You know, my mother, where she last worked in Lewisham, talked about the fact that some of the ladies on the bus would see her and say, "Oh, nurse, you delivered my baby." And that was one of the reflections in the documentary. 30 years later, she was remembered by this woman on the bus. So we are, you know, Black nurses have touched the lives of so many people, you know, by the way that we've cared for in all settings, whether it's a midwifery, whether it's mental health settings, surgery, wherever we are working, we have done so much of that. And I think, you know, this year in particular has just given us, and I suppose that's why we wanted to I thought it would be good to just talk about, you know, celebrate us as Black nurses. You know, I was quite a bit disappointed that, you know, that documentary, it was shown during October, but they were showing it at, they're showing it at half 12.
But Caroline, can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
We that documentary has been shown since it was first made in 2016, and it has been shown almost every year since then,
yes,
at random times.
And
I think it's wonderful because it was something quite groundbreaking to actually do something like that, to acknowledge the nurses who worked.
Yeah.
And I think what I wanted to say as well, that it was important and it was inevitable, you know, that the NHS would get the best deal that was ever going when they employed Caribbean nurses, because we have a very strong sense of family, and we have a sense of, you know, it takes a village to build to rear a child, and we brought, you know, all along with the culture, etc., all that personality and all the idea of family and nurturing. That is a very, very strong, you know, emotion, nurturing. And I think that was one of my strengths in terms of, that's how I was brought up.
Yep.
You know, to love each other and to nurture each other. And my mother, I mean, when I got so sad and upset and worried about, you know, the racism, and I rang my mom and said, you know, I want to come home. I can't stand this place. These people are rude and racist. And she said, you know, the racism is their problem, not yours. And you find a way to deal with it, because you didn't go there to like the British. You went to work with them and work for them. And you went, you know, to fulfill your dreams and then move on. So get on with it and move and do your dreams. And you know, the one thing that really resonated with me in those days, that made me look ahead and look forward, was when I couldn't take it one day on the ward. I stood up and I screamed or spoke loudly. I mean, I don't scream, of course. I spoke very loudly and I said, listen, you people, let me tell you something. I don't know where it came from. And I said, with my hands going, I know I have been Black for 21 years. So tell me something I don't know. Tell me something new. And, you know, that statement just changed my life because it empowered me, you know, to get on with it. And, you know, they didn't have an answer for that. Afterwards, you know, a few of them still carried on, but it made me feel so different and made me feel that I could accomplish and conquer and do anything. Because, you know, the racism and, you know, the doctors saying I was the blue-eyed girl and, you know, how did I manage that, and et cetera, et cetera. It didn't bother me. It didn't bother me because I suddenly decided, you know, midwifery was my forte. It was my opportunity to bring life into the world, and there was no better privilege than that. And so I just dived into it, and I knew my children were, as I used to tell them, it's not the amount of time you have with mommy, you know, it's the quality of the time, you know. And so I was chronically exhausted because I had to put all this work and effort into the NHS as well as my family. And I, you know, and you know, whether I slept or not was immaterial, you know, because, you know, you had to do it. And I think that is what made me, that is what sort of put me on the map in midwifery, as I was told that you were on the map and you're a great ambassador for midwives, because I really, really loved being an advocate for them, for the midwives and the women. And so I just went, when I got this letter from the Prime Minister's office, and I screamed about it. And when I rang the Royal College of Midwives and I said, do you know anything about this? I got this letter telling me about this MBE. What is that? And what, because I didn't know. It's not the sort of thing you go wrong, you know, doing, well, I am going to work towards this. I am going to work towards an MBE or OB or CBE. It doesn't enter your psyche. And so it was quite a shock. And I was told, and it was one of the nicest things I ever heard, that, you know, you got it because you're not just a good midwife, because there are 38,000 of you. You got it because you are innovative and special, and you went always outside the box. And, you know, you never let anything stop you. There was no limit to your time or your energy. And that is how, you know, you were noticed by everybody. That's what I was told. And it was quite something. But I did it because I just loved it. I loved it. I just loved the babies, the parents, and being part of their lives. It was such a privilege. It really was. I really enjoyed my career after I got over the hurdle of the basic training.
And I think that is a fantastic note on which to leave this. Just to basically say, thank you so much, Allyson, and to all of the nurses, all of us who are contributing, who have gone before, all of us to be able to celebrate the fact that at the end of the day, they can't take it away. People like Allyson,
there's nothing that they can't take it back.
And still saving the NHS going forward. And I just want
to I congratulate all of you that are still doing it, that have come, you know, in the wake of all that we went through, and we've been called Windrush babies and, you know, part of the Windrush generation. So is your mom, Caroline. And you know, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. Yeah, and I don't look a day over 50.
And we're going down hard. We're going down.
Yeah, absolutely, fighting all the way.
Yeah, and I think we can look forward to seeing, you know, the fruits of all your hard labor going forward.
Yes, I see it all the time, and I'm very proud. I'm very proud.
And I promise, I guess one of my actions is to continue putting my head above the parapet, because the last few months have been, woo, but I volunteered and I'm going to go hard. Thank you for being an inspiration, Allyson.
My pleasure. My pleasure.